as a brand new startup, it's endpoint security, cloud security, user security, and application security. Those are the 4 things I would actually be most focused on. And that's just because that's where my attack surfaces are.
The Adversarial Podcast. Why you gotta be so adversarial? Adversarial. It's time to get adversarial.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Adversarial Podcast. Good to be back together again. We've got no shortage of cyber topics as usual. Before we jump in, Sunil, what part of the planet are you on? I'm just curious.
I am in Athens, Greece.
Weren't you in Greece very recently?
Yes, but not this part of Greece.
Okay. All right, I won't dig on that, but at some point we're going to figure out what you've been mining for over there. Mario, you look like your locale hasn't changed too much. Doing anything exciting and exotic like that?
No, but I've been reading a book called Mosquito. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. And part of it they talk about Alexander the Great. So Sunil, even though I'm not in Greece, I feel a little close to where you're at. What I've learned.
Well, I think he conquered Greece. He was Macedonian, but
yes, he was Macedonian. That's correct, and that's because Sparta and Athens are just beating up each other. And
you guys just had a nerd battle, and I thought Mario laid you to waste, and then Sunil, you somehow one-upped him, and oh my God. All right, well, let's get into what nobody pays us to talk about and jump right into it. This first thing, Tilson brought this up to us, right, who's been producing the podcast and helping us out, security research PhD. He brought up this EO, this executive order that came out on January 16th, so just at the end of the Biden administration, and it's on strengthening and promoting innovation in the nation's cybersecurity. I did not see a lot of chatter about this on the wire, so to speak. And when I read it, when I read the title, I immediately thought promoting innovation, like, oh, cool, this is the venture ecosystem. There's going to be something about incubators. And so I, through the power of GPT, read this massive article very quickly. And it was nothing to do with that at all. It was kind of CISA-esque hard requirements. There's a lot to talk about here. Was this necessary? Could it be influential? Is it going to get wound back? Any thoughts on it?
Well, in terms of will it get wound back, a lot of the executive orders from the Biden administration have been rescinded by Trump. I don't think this one was rescinded, and that's a good sign, presumably. But whether it's because it was released so late that it wasn't within their targets or not is a different story. Originally, we were waiting for this back in October of last year. I'm glad it's out. But that's one of the things that struck me initially when I read this was just how specific it was. Very granular technical measures like implementing signed BGP messages. I kind of was wondering, that's not normal. I don't usually see, I haven't read many, but of all the executive orders I read, I rarely see something of that level of granularity.
I double checked on some of these things like TLS, right? TLS 1.3. Site finally won. But I went through that because I was immediately thinking are they going to say that the planet has to negotiate TLS 1.3 all around? No. First of all, this seems to be really directed towards .gov systems again. And it's kind of sad to think that you have to use an executive order to implement policy on .gov when you're .gov. Seems kind of weird. You would think there'd be policy making like there is at organizations too. You can just do that. But alas, and then it's the same thing again where, just to needle on that TLS thing, it says that systems shall support it, which just means it'll be one of the offered TLS versions, and it really will be up to the client and not that. And it'll, in other words, mean they could still support lower versions, and the clients can negotiate down. And so it almost seems like the same sins of our predecessors just codified all over again.
This is not just the agencies that are being pushed, it's the ecosystems that these agencies are dealing business with. Those translate, in my opinion, to vendors or consultants that are trying to earn business from the government agencies. And so what ends up happening is, even if you are not directly a vendor to a government agency, your customer who's using your services to provide a service for that government agency is now applicable. So there's a definitely a cascading effect that occurs here. I have gone through it at my previous companies, and it does have impact, Jerry. It will have some impact. My last comment, IoT certification requirements, I swear to God, I think IoT is the place where good souls go to die, okay? I haven't seen any way, any good investments on IoT, big promises, phosphorus, 3, 4, 5 years ago. What is that? I don't know. I'm just IoT scares the hell out of me.
I think we're all very interested when there's a potential for government interaction to help with the private sector or with the public or with the consumers when it comes to cybersecurity. And that's not going on here. And it's tough in a democracy to do too much there. But what would you guys do? What could be done if you had some say in uplifting cybersecurity? Do you have any strong thoughts of what you'd love to put in an executive order?
It kind of gets to the question that we typically get asked at the beginning of every year, which is what are our 5 priorities for cybersecurity? I don't think the president would be asked that question, but if I'm the federal CISO or something like that, then it's a valid question. Like, what are the 5 things I should worry about? And later on, I think in this segment, we're going to talk about what insurance thinks, okay? But we all, in our own respective organizations, run cybersecurity for ourselves. And so for me, as a brand new startup, it's endpoint security, cloud security, user security, and application security. Those are the 4 things I would actually be most focused on. And that's just because that's where my attack surfaces are. I think that's really the question that each organization needs to ask. And when we look at the U.S. government, they have different attack surfaces. Like, for example, going back to the executive order, I remember post-quantum cryptography is something that they put on as one of their priorities. And I can see why, even though it's 10 years, 15 years, 20 years out, they care a lot because government encryption, like just encryption systems we need to think that far ahead when it comes to encryption systems. And if you don't plan that far ahead, then we're going to be in big trouble.
I've been hearing that message to Neil about quantum computers since I was in diapers, man. So it just keeps being.
My point, though, is that for me, it's not a big priority, but for the government, it is, right? And I think at the end of the day, what are the priorities for you will be different for me just because we have different attack surfaces.
Yeah. My observation on this is, if the listeners of this podcast, you'll hear a common theme with Jerry and Sunil, and that's approach it from a risk base. First, look at your company. What is your company's business? What is it that they're doing? Are they, writing out code that people are, applications that people are using, your clients are using, or is it a service, a consulting service? First, find out what is it? What is the business you're in? Right? Even if you're a small startup or a big company, then understand if that is, what is the supporting cast? How am I interacting with those assets? And then I would come out with some, the easy generic statement would be take care of your endpoints, which I think, by the way, we all agree, continue to support endpoints. But endpoints is not enough. It's like, what else in endpoints? Is your browser, we talked about extensions. What are we doing with extensions? Are we using corporate browsers, secure browsers? So there's a lot more nuance that I would like to dig in. But I also, with Sunil saying, I would also agree with Sunil's cloud statement. I would look at the CI/CD. If you're in a development environment, if that's what you're doing, you got to go look at that CI/CD, and you got to figure out how you're authenticating anybody in that. So if you don't have a good idea of that, and you're a green field right now, do it now before it's too late. And I think everything else you guys have said, including training, security training. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Well, on Sunil's point about, like, he is a good example of the post-quantum. It's interesting to me because, one, I think the majority of organizations don't need to worry about that right now, right? Let your successor worry about turning that on in Google the morning of 2029 or 2039 or whatever it is. For a few reasons. One, the turnover, and not just in humans, but in technology and stack and all that in the private sector is so fast anyway. And then secondly, most of the systems that are implementing encryption standards are third party, and people aren't rolling their own, fortunately, et cetera. And most importantly, the threat profile, right? I mean, encryption only matters if you have a threat profile where you have data that's important enough that people are getting ciphertext, and then you got to worry about whether they can crack it, which is not as common as the movies would have us think in the private sector. .gov has to worry about that. I'll admit it. Finally, we got somebody with a threat profile that someone is going to run supercomputer banks against data they captured 7 years ago and try to crack it. Only in Gov, just about, right? So I think that's important. The other angle, though, is that it takes 25 years to get anything done in government. So there's a good reason to start worrying about right now, right? It's going to actually just take that long to actually get anything changed. So I'm okay with post-quantum cryptography being in there. The rest of it, I'm not really sure. But, Sunil, you immediately went into enterprise and what you could do for, and what we should do for our respective organizations. But is there anything that is in public policy that you've always been wanting to get done and that you wish was getting done?
Oh, well, actually, fortunately, it is actually mentioned. This is something I've been wanting to do for a while. It's SBOM. I've been a very strong advocate for SBOM for a long time. And this executive order really doubles down on SBOMs. But I think SBOMs have been misunderstood as well. The way that I look at SBOMs is that it's a demonstration of how tall you are when it comes to the maturity of either your technology stack or the maturity of your software development lifecycle processes. If you can't create an SBOM for yourself, then it points to a flaw in one of those two areas, or maybe both even. And ultimately, it points to a concern that if there is a flaw discovered in your software, if you didn't have either a modern tech stack or you didn't have good software development processes, it would be really hard for you to actually go and fix that flaw. It's just a representation. It's a proxy representation of that. Now, I think a lot of us gotten hung over by the fact that, what if someone pokes in my SBOM and finds I have a vulnerable package? Well, guess what? There's a ton of vulnerable packages. It doesn't mean that my application's vulnerable. And we all know that story as well. And the push that I'm hoping for in technology and I'm hoping for in how we look at it is not just the presence of the package, not just even the fact that you have that in your software, but that the actual function is called, that the actual function that's vulnerable is being called within your application. When we get to that level of granularity that we know that that's the case, that's when it matters. But again, just being able to generate an SBOM for me is just you are this tall when it comes to your software development process.
And I would think with the SBOM is that I think some of us in our industry are not reading the documentations well enough and the guidelines. What Sunil is saying is completely the right approach, in my opinion. I think some of our security folks, they read the headlines, maybe they'll read the summary, but they don't go in and deep and try to understand or have one of their team members assess it and identify the key components that you should do. And all they do is wave, I need an SBOM for my engineering team. And it's like, it's the thing that all security people are known for. Well, some of us, we just throw names, acronyms at people to force them to do something instead of being more thoughtful, more nuanced. Study what the SBOM is. And that's what Sunil's saying. And that's where you get the benefits, where you start finding, you know what, I might not be that mature in my SBOM, but at least I got a framework. And this is where I am in my path. And this is where I'm going to go 2-3 years from now, depending on the money, depending on the external pressure, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think the downsides outweigh the good sides of SBOM. So, I wanted to jump in right away and crap on SBOM when you brought it up, Sunil, and then I think you kind of felt it coming, and so you immediately explained it, and I get it. So to lay it all out, and check me on this, like the idea of just iterating all the components that are in your software, that's all we're talking about. And what you're saying is organizations that are able to do that have a degree of agility and awareness and management that's really positive, and you want to see that. And so you don't want an SBOM. What you want is proof that an organization knows what the hell they're doing. Yeah,
that's right. Yes.
The problem is, as you know, organizations aren't saying like, "Can you get an SBOM?" Yeah, I can. Okay, cool. You're done. No, they're saying, "I want a list of the packages," and then they are running them through a check of CVEs. Mm-hmm. And when they find that there's a CVE on a package that you listed in your SBOM, they want a notarized letter from you promising that it's been upgraded, which is really bad and a waste of time and resource.
That's right.
And I feel like we've kind of created a monster with SBOM because so many people are misusing them. I used to say, and it's very similar to the good part of SBOM. I used to say, if I really need to know an organization is secure, let me give them like a little random string token hash word and ask them to put it in a meta tag on their main web landing site. What's the harm in that? Nothing. And then I can see that they did it. And I would argue that that is a good proxy for what you're trying to achieve by asking for an SBOM. If an organization could get that done, they probably also know where their software is and how to run change control and how to get things deployed and all the things you need to run security right. And if you ask a giant bank that question and you need to get Brian Moynihan to get that done, what you just witnessed, and by the way, he can't get it done either. If you want to get a meta tag put on the main landing site of a major enterprise bank in less than 24 hours, oh my God, that would be, it might actually be impossible. Why? Organizational dysfunction, communication, lack of documentation awareness. If I got an SBOM from that same org, I'm not sleeping well at night because I have no way of knowing it's actually comprehensive, which systems did it come from, all of that. So I don't know the upside is really guaranteed, but I think the downside of me now just peppering them with you're using Log4j version X somewhere in your entire stack, and we need to stop all the presses and get the lawyers out until you tell me it's upgraded. I think that downside is just really bad.
Yeah, so this Van Halen has a story about brown M&Ms. They have whenever they do a contract with a venue, they say if you violate any of these terms, then we have the right to cancel the whole show, and you don't get your money back. Well, one provision is have a bowl of M&Ms and remove any brown M&Ms. Okay, I don't want any brown M&Ms. Well, for those who don't pay attention, and they just either put a bowl of M&Ms or they don't even put a bowl of M&Ms. Van Halen just says, you know what, we're going to cancel the show. Not because of the M&Ms, but because they don't trust that the people who were building all this paid attention to the scaffolding and all the catwalks, and it was a physical danger issue. And so that was their cue. So effectively, I look at the Van Halen's brown M&Ms like the SBOM. SBOM is like that, right, for me. Could you poke holes in a lot of other parts of their organization and whatever else it might be? Yes, you probably could, but it's just a signal, right? It's a signal to help us understand, should I look deeper? Should I investigate further? And I definitely would struggle to put in a little bit of information to any website that Bank of America has, because it just procedurally takes just so long. But that said, I think one's ability to do that in an agile, efficient manner is a strong sign that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, but Sunil, when it comes, I wasn't in the banking like you guys were. Certainly you, Sunil. I think that slowness is kind of a feature for banks or in that space, right? No, like you don't want to make these sudden changes that could potentially lose millions of dollars to people. I don't know. So I think, to me, it's, I know we constantly talk trash about some of these verticals, but maybe it's a feature in the banking industry.
Well, I mean, it definitely was. I mean, that's how we got to where we are, and the change control rigor and the segregation of duties and all the crap that the Big Four walks in talking about from 30 years ago is all from avoiding the great outage of 1983 or whatever those lessons were and the scars we're bringing in. And so I think it was for the right reasons initially, but now I think that's not set up well for cybersecurity. It's really good to keep human error out, which is what the whole problems were back then. But that's really, it stymied us when you have I hate to say even a 0 day, but when you have a published issue with an application and you're scrambling to get it fixed, all of those walls that we built up internally are holding us back. And that's why it's adversarial risk management, right? Without the adversary, everything we talk about works great. Lock it down, freeze it, code freeze, right? I mean, code freeze is a great example of this, actually. Everybody loves to do a code freeze going into a major launch, all of that. What if you can't patch security vulnerabilities? And I've seen that. It absolutely happens. The old school operational controls can work against us.
I always had an idea that I hated Thanksgiving and I hated Christmas. those holidays, because crap always happen. Attacks always happen during that time. And so I'm thinking, okay, why? Why is this? Well, besides the fact that we're on vacation. Another thing is, if you have retail clients, if you're a vendor and you have retail clients and you're providing a software, there's a freeze, man. If you mess up those holidays, that 2 weeks in or 1 week in November and December, dear God, it cost them billions of dollars. So there's no way, Jerry, I'm going to patch a 0 day during that time without I got to be careful.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what, like, I might break something if I don't fully test it.
I get it. Yeah, it's a balancing act for sure. Yeah. Well, Mario, if you could change, if you're looking at your, Sunil already jumped into it a little bit. And by the way, Sunil, I think your answers on like your priorities going in were just way too vague. Said endpoints and cloud and like, oh, come on. You basically just covered a taxonomy.
Sure, I can double click on any one of those. But,
yeah. Well, before you do, Mario, what let me rephrase the question. What do you think are the biggest blind spots, gaps, to-dos for enterprises or even large organizations going into 2025 that they should be prioritizing?
Whatever your security organization is not keeping an eye on, analyzing, or understanding is where badness is going to happen. So my best advice to people is, I know I don't want to oversell our role, but I think we do play an important role. So I'm a believer in security. Whatever organization we don't have an oversight on or understanding of, I think that's where potential badness can occur. I'm not saying the other areas are not, but yeah, visibility, understanding what the heck you have there.
So we can't get by without talking about TikTok, right? But let's take it in a different direction. So I think this is pretty interesting. One of the most recent stories was that TikTok was about to get banned. Maybe it got banned for a while. I don't know. I can't keep up. That people all ran to an alternative platform that was ostensibly subject to the same threats. It was, controlled or controllable by the Chinese government in that case. I think it was called RedNote. And that people were all going to shift over there, and security pros were all kind of panicking. And so rather than talk about RedNote versus TikTok or anything else like that, I think this goes back to what I was asking earlier about what can a government do, right? So, I mean, we can't play whack-a-mole. As long as people are able to access the internet freely, then they can go to bad sites. Is it once 100 million of them go there, then the government gets to get involved? Or what's the end game here?
The big issue that a lot of people had around TikTok or the ban was around suppressing free speech. That wasn't the reason for the ban. It was a national security issue tied to foreign influence type of concern. And that's why the whole premise behind the ban is, look, if you divest the company from a Chinese-owned or Chinese-operated entity, then hey, just keep, you can operate TikTok all you want, right? So it wasn't a free speech issue. It was a ownership and influence issue. And the reality being that there is no non-state-owned enterprise in China, right? All the enterprises are owned by the state. So the concern, of course, is that China would put undue influence on TikTok to say, hey, spy on the citizenry of the U.S. or influence them in a particular way, or to
politically influence people. Yep.
Right, exactly. That's different than what the U.S. can do, right? The U.S. cannot do that by any stretch of the imagination. Can the U.S. issue a national security letter to grab information in a very secret, private manner from, let's say, a company that's run by a U.S. entity? Yes, they can. But as some of you know, there's a lot of transparency reports now that we have that says, here's how many NSLs, like national security letters I've got, that says, what the government's trying to do. At least there's some degree of transparency there. And with China, there is no transparency. And so, it's a different mode of operation that is the cause of concern here.
I mentioned before we started deploying some new deployment in China, so I had to learn a lot. And school of hard knocks when it came to China, within a year or 2 years of moving there and learning all about that. Moving as in the deployment, not me physically moving there. Here's the deal: in China, try to get logs out of China, even just for users, or small amount of logs from China outside of China, let's say to the US. and go look at the regulations that the Chinese government has actually is enforcing there. They actually care about this a lot. Okay, so if they care about it, why? Okay, maybe you say, well, they don't want to influence their very tight control media, etc. Okay, fair enough, fair enough. But they want to basically also, they want to understand us Americans or the Western countries, and they want to potentially, as Sunil said, influence. If it wasn't that big of a deal, then why are the Chinese allowing their logs to go outside? Just ask yourself that. And on another note, just one more on this one. It goes back to the, Western, the American public, consumers. Look, folks, at the one hand, you don't want an oversight of the government. You don't want heavy-handed government in anything like CISA telling you what to do. And you'll be the first one to scream when you find out your kids' log activities are being monitored by the Chinese government. You'll be the first one to complain. So, folks, you gotta have some balance here. Is my point.
And let me get your clarification on something. When you're talking about logs, I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff around China and technology, and what I see enterprise security teams trying to address, where it's not about what you're allowed to do, but what you can do, and it should be about what you're allowed to do, right? Because you're not saying. I mean, and it's just a technical thing. Like it's hard for them to actively and perfectly enforce all the restrictions. And I see a lot of people, VPN, right? Oh yeah, when your employees are over there, make sure you VPN. Make sure you circumvent the firewall this way. How are we going to admin our office? Well, we're going to make sure that they're working off of. We're not going to data domicile, and people are breaking the law. And I think that the right way to deal with that is to never break the law. You should comply with it. And then if that hurts, you should question about whether or not you want to be operating there.
That is a feature of the Chinese government to make it vague enough. Because what ends up happening is they know people are breaking the laws. They see the freaking movement of data, right? When you're doing businesses in AWS in China, wake up, folks. That's just not AWS. The Chinese government is there working with AWS, with the Azures of the world, with all these different companies. You have to, or else you're not going to do business. So they see the movement of data back and forth. They do see that. What they do is they allow people to break the rules, because then one day they'll knock on the door and says, I've noticed you've been doing this, blah, blah, blah. We're going to let it go, but we need you to hire this person that works for the government. Now hire them in your company. Or I need you to install this piece of software just to keep things open. So all I'm saying is the road to hell is paved with good intentions, especially in China.
Yeah, but I do think also that, like I said, people need to, if they read something that says, what, they want us to do this, then don't make it easy on the business, a security person, by kind of burying it and circumventing the law and like, okay, good. Whew, we were supposed to open a new office and I got it open by figuring out a way around. Let people know, like, we can't open the office. We can't run our WAN lines out there. We can't backhaul traffic. We are going to have 600 millisecond delays on everything that we're doing. If you make it really easy, then that's just going to stick around. And as long as like they're having their cake and eating it too, and that they're getting the economic benefits of these organizations still operating there, if not, maybe things would change a bit. Not carte blanche, but if everybody stopped showing up there because of this rule or that rule, then maybe they would have to get changed a little bit.
Jerry, you're right. You're absolutely correct, and that's the role we have here to play as leaders in security. You can educate the team and say you cannot break these rules, or else something bad is going to happen. And honestly, I've said this before. You can walk away. If you're going to do like that, I'm going to walk away. I'm no longer going to be the leader here. Now, I know there's a lot of job things going on in the CISO world. Maybe you can't do that easily anymore, but nevertheless.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, I remember when my former employer, I do remember a lot of conversation. It was like, what do you mean they're not on our email system? The Beijing office can't be on our email system? We can't IM with them? And I was like, yeah, exactly. We can't. And it would have been really easy to be like, tick, 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 tick. Oh, yeah, it's all working now. It's great, right? And all we'd be doing is dumping revenue into China in that case. So it was like, feel the pain, at least be aware of it. Make it a business decision and not some cyber hero decision, right? Because you're the one who's going to take the fall for it at the end of the day, if you're the one who made the decision unilaterally. All right, so I asked you guys like what's going to save the day going forward, and what would you change if anything, whether it's pub or private. But there was an interesting report that came out from Marsh, right, cyber insurer, and they are basically saying that they did a study of correlating incidents from their point of view, things that they worry about as an insurer, to key controls, with the goal of publishing this big key control list and things that people should focus on. Well, first of all, do you think that they're in a good position to do this, and you think that this is important and something that people have been hungering for?
Yeah, so I'm actually pretty familiar with the report, and the report was largely written by this guy, Scott Stransky, at Marsh McLennan, MIT-trained data scientist or something like that. Anyway, he's pretty credible. And the perspective here being that he took a very data-driven approach to see what moves the needle when it comes to paid insurance losses. So when they actually pay out insurance claims, what were the factors that went into increasing or decreasing the losses associated with actual claims. So this is about as I don't know if I would say this is about as good as I've seen when it comes to actuarial content, right? Things that actually is based on real life cases. Can there still be improvements? Absolutely. There's just still not enough data from the standpoint to really understand what might move the needle beyond the top 5 or top 3 things. But that's it. I think it's been actually a pretty good study where Scott identifies a couple core things. So in the report, he identifies like hardening of, especially like Active Directory, is increases it has the highest strength or signal strength when it comes to lowering insurance losses, which kind of makes sense to some degree, but it's also extraordinarily hard to do for many organizations. So are there other things that might be a little easier that could still move it as much? We all know MFA, for example, is something that is highly recommended. But that was somewhat interesting too, because MFA by itself, if it depends on how you deploy MFA and to whom you deploy MFA and what circumstances, and if you meet 3 specific conditions, then it moves the needle. Otherwise, it doesn't really move the needle at all. So anyway, it was a really fascinating study. Again, one of the best or the closest things I've seen to being like true actuarial science. And I look forward to seeing more like this in the future.
I appreciate this report. I was excited to see it. There were some things that I felt, for me, multi-factor authentication is tantamount to breathing air. If you're not breathing air, you're not going to make it. You folks, really, multi-factor authentication is really important. I think the argument, and multi-factor authentication FIDO2, okay? Multi-factor authentication FIDO2. I'm just going to continue to say that until I'm proven wrong. What this guy said, though, with this MFA, somebody keep me honest, is, okay, if some people are wearing their seatbelts, and you have a trucking company, some of your truckers are wearing seatbelts, and the other truckers in your company are not wearing seatbelts, well, there is a high case that some of them who get in an accident are going to die or going to get injured really badly. No kidding, Sherlock. If you're not putting on the seatbelt, you're likely to get hurt, right? So what they're saying is, please keep me honest, get me off this soapbox is a big one, okay? What they're saying is multi-factor authentication doesn't work necessarily as well when it's not deployed across the enterprise with people with elevated privileges such as administrators or in protecting valuable assets. Duh, no kidding. So what the people have said, their customers or the data they were seeing was, if you're just doing MFA to pass PCI certification, just to do a checkbox, ain't gonna work. If you're gonna do multi-factor authentication across the board, then we think it will work. I think that's what I read from this report.
Yeah, so what I really liked about this report is that it's a lot more specific in terms of what moves the needle. So again, it's not just MFA, it's MFA, there are 3 types of MFA, I guess, questions or factors that they considered. Do you use MFA for all remote logins? Okay, do you use MFA for all remote logins? Yes or no? Do you use MFA for all administrative account access? Do you use MFA for access to your most critical systems or data? Okay, so those are the three core questions. Not do you use MFA for everyone, blah blah blah, but rather do you cover those three cases? And individually, if you cover, let's say, what was fascinating in Scott's. This isn't in the report, but when Scott presented this, he mentioned if you do 2 out of these 3, it doesn't matter whether you have MFA at all. I was like, what? It didn't make it. MFA did not move the needle if you only did 2 of these 3. You had to do all 3 of them, and then it moved the needle. And that was what I thought was really fascinating.
Yeah, when I look at this, I had a different take. So you set me up to not do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm questioning the data science a little bit, right? And not the algorithms or the math behind it, which I think the guy's a lot better than I am and all that. But the approach here. And so it's pretty transparent, too. It's not like anybody's trying to fool us. But this is correlation, right? It's not causality, right? Which is often impossible to prove. But and these are questionnaire-based things. So I assume that the way they collect the data is they always ask all their insured entities over and over again the same set of questions. And then later, when they have enough big enough data set, they mine and they look for correlations between, okay, of all the people that got owned, what percentage of them answered no to the MFA question or yes to this? So we don't know anything about causality necessarily here. But when I look through the data, and this is, it's a little bit old, right? It's 2022 maybe was the end on this, if not 2021. And so that'll only add to what I'm talking about. But this is an East Coast, West Coast CISO thing to me. And what I'm taking away from this is that the ransoms are getting paid by what I'll call East Coast companies. Doesn't mean they're literally on the East Coast, but it means Active Directory entities. And you know, there might be a ton of $50,000 ransoms being paid by modern enterprises, whatever, but those don't add up much compared to the $2 million ransoms. And those must be happening out of orgs that are still running Active Directory. And I'm saying that because the correlation in here they were finding is that things like people not pushing GPOs, like group policy objects out of AD. Mario, you don't even nod. You don't know what the hell a GPO is. No way. West of the Mississippi? No way. I'm not going to be taking you.
I told you, I used to have an MCSC back in the 90s, bro. Come on.
I was going to say, I'm taking you way back. Yeah.
MCSC with IIS of all things.
Oh, wow. Because I could blame you for all that, but that's fair. But you know what I mean? Like this stuff is, so when you think of MFA, and by the way, when they ask people the questions about MFA, and I've seen this because I've helped companies out in answering to these things, when they ask MFA questions, it's like, 1, do you require MFA for everybody who's coming in from remote? And that's a really good question because an old school East Coast company, that means can you VPN with single factor creds? There better be a correlation between that and ransomware. If you're allowing that, yeah, of course you're getting owned. So everybody knows how to do MFA on VPNs because that was one of the first places that implemented MFA. It was the first place you could roll your eyes and say, I can't believe you don't have MFA. Right? You could still almost do it on banks. We could do it on VPNs a long time ago. And I mean real VPNs. And then the other is, irrespective of a user's location, we require multi-factor for all administrative account access. Of course, right? Simple enough. And if you're a Google admin, you should have to do that. If you're an Okta admin, if you're a Snowflake admin, anything like that, there's AWS. There's policies where you say all admins have to have MFA, and actually it's very specific nowadays, like hard keys and not and there you go, FIDO2. You can do all that. Do that in Active Directory. And by the way, all these organizations that are saying, yes, we do that, they are supposedly forcing MFA for an Active Directory, for all their Active Directory admins. I don't know how to do that. And you know, hey, here's some comments on the LinkedIn post, you know, rein it on in. But I remember pushing back with an insurer and saying, like, I don't want my client to answer yes to this because it's impossible. But more importantly, I want to call into question everybody else that you have that answered yes. Is this just a ruse where you're going to deny all their claims because you're going to say, haha, it was a trick question. You said you did, and it's impossible. If you're talking about a Gina plugin, meaning on the interactive, on the Control-Alt-Delete to log into Windows, that it does MFA, that's not MFA. That's like a little user level, you know, it fires something off and checks it. But it means that the way the ransomware works, when it's moving off command line and end to end, it has no idea there's MFA. Whatever's in that Active Directory hashed password store in LSAS, is gospel. Like that is it. So I started pushing on that with one of the insurers, and they turned me on to these two esoteric, tiny little companies that I would have said they were like on the take. They were pushing them around, but it was kind of, I get it. It was basically a passive / kind of race condition solution that would intercept Kerberos traffic when you're trying to authenticate, and it would push an out of band MFA request before it would grant that, right? That's neat and cool and novel. You can't tell me 90% of the insurance companies have deployed that. So maybe that's your problem with MFA. And do you guys, am I out? Like, is there a way to do MFA on domain admins?
I'm gonna let me on that domain admin stuff. I'm gonna put that on I'm going to put it on the side because you guys are East Coast. You can have that conversation about it. Okay. My thoughts are you freaking aren't in the network to be able to look at Kerberos and all the other stuff. Not that Kerberos going to give you anything, just, but you get the point. You're already in. What the heck? So let me put that away. I think I want to double click on what Sunil said about the remoteness of MFA, enforcing MFA. People think of this whole MFA remotely inwards into your company. They're not using the same concept I'm hearing when it talks about SaaS applications. Hey, not using MFA or enforcing MFA for your SaaS application, don't worry about it. That's never going to have any problems on the internet. We've never seen things like that happen when you're not using MFA and enforcing MFA for all your users on SaaS applications, right? I never heard of anything like that happening. I also would get away from the idea that only MFA for administrators. Listen, everyone, especially if you're using SaaS applications, a regular user has more access than they need. And more often than not, they may even have more access than your administrator has potentially. The data, how much access we're granting to people is nuts. So I don't need to target an administrator to a SaaS application. I just need a user.
Yeah. But yeah, especially if, even today, but especially if you wind back, I would say that SaaS apps have not been involved in a lot of claim payouts, right? I didn't say insurance incidents. I mean, I didn't say cyber incidents.
Jerry, 2024, you want to look at 2024, what happens to some SaaS applications not enforcing MFA? I don't want to bring out any of those.
but I mean, I'm getting the claims. But right, I mean, you're right. I mean, I notice incidents like crazy, right? That's where you go for the data. But all the claims were paid out, especially up through 2022 in this data set around ransomware. We just talked in the last episode about S3 buckets being targeted with ransomware. And I was saying, like, it's about time. Where the hell have these bad guys been? but that's why. I mean, until that point, I agree it was nasty. And if somebody got in your Salesforce and dumped everything, I didn't like it, and the CEO wouldn't have liked it, and everybody in between. But there wasn't an insurance claim getting paid because they weren't ransoming it in Salesforce, right? Despite what some vendors would have you believe. So maybe in the 2030 report, where it goes back to the data set today and next year, that'll matter, and we'll see some correlation. But I don't think there was a lot of correlation with insurance claims being paid.
I want to go back to an earlier comment, though, you made around Active Directory and enabling MFA for admins. I think this is I would argue maybe there's an underlying ploy here, which is, look, you as a business, your core competency is not running Active Directory. Right? I don't know of any. Tell me if there's any company besides Microsoft itself whose core competency is running Active Directory. And the answer, I think,
Hitachi, third-party consultants that go out there and implement it for you. I don't want to pick up Hitachi.
Perhaps, maybe, but they have an underlying reason to basically. Well, either way, they're offloading it from the first party, right? And anyway, the point is that I can actually enable MFA for my Active Directory when it's Azure Active Directory, right? So in many ways, that's kind of the answer. Hey, if you can't, it's almost like you can't. You're right. It's a trick question. You can't go use Azure Active Directory instead.
But hold on a minute, right? Because I mean, Mario could say the same thing about dropping Google Workspace or whatever, and like, oh, you can do MFA. All you got to do is make your directory open to the public, right? I mean, because why does Azure have MFA? Because it's open to the damn world. You know, you're actually bringing on a whole bunch of risks in order to pat yourself on the back about finally mitigating it. One of the good things about on-prem AD and all of that, whether it had, MFA or not, didn't really matter until ransomware, right? Because then people started dropping things on endpoints and moving around.
No. So I think the premise here is that you're going to the argument that your internal Active Directory is not externally exposed. Sure, it's not publicly exposed, but is there an attacker inside your environment that can have access to it? And the answer, of course, is yes, right? So what's the difference?
Well, I will say that Jerry's point is very valid. The report was pointing back to 2020, 2021. I think we've talked about this before around ransomware. Ransomware's changed in the last 2 years, 3 years, whereby before they used to encrypt your data or messed up your AD so nobody could authenticate, right? You know, everybody could not do their work because they couldn't authenticate your AD until you paid the ransomware. They've gotten away from all of that, and what they've done, not totally gotten away from it. I'm overgeneralizing here. But new ransomwares are just stealing your data and holding you, saying, I have your data, I'm going to go and expose it. Pay me, or else I'm not going to, or else I'm going to expose it. So the nature of ransomware is changing, I think.
I totally agree. Yeah, and my evidence for it, it's funny because like you talk about causality again and what came first, but the news reports were kind of saying ransomware actors have figured out that they can now also just hold data, blackmail, in addition to bombing the endpoints, is what I'll just call it otherwise. I think it was kind of the opposite causality there. I don't think that they've, done a revenue diversification scheme here in anticipation of going public. I think that the endpoint stuff stopped working, right? Because if you did a classic endpoint detonation on a Windows laptop ransomware, if you did it to an old school firm where it then moved up into AD and all the endpoints that are lateral and all that, yay, big deal, you're going to get paid. If you do it to a modern corporation, probably either of where you guys work today, people would just physically throw the laptop onto the floor and order a new one on Amazon or whatever it is, right? I think it's just that the modern enterprise, forget about AD, they also don't have networks. They don't have LAN. They don't have lateral proximity, no less, movement between them.
Who's using NFS anymore, Sunil? Do you know? I don't know who's using NFS, right? Or
Only Showdown does.
Yeah. That's where you could do a little bit of badness, right? You gotta have that interconnectivity.
Yeah. So I do think that it's changing a little bit, and I think that these insurance reports are going to be a little bit lagging, and I also, but like going back to my assault on data science, I mean, I don't think you can just blindly say like where is a correlation. You want to look for causality, which is very hard in most data sets. However, conveniently, us in the cybersecurity industry, thanks to like the kill chain methodology, have put a lot of work into causality, right? If there's a given incident, Mandiant does a hell of a great job talking about the 6 steps that led to it. So we don't just have to say, was that company located in Toronto? Did that company, have a remote workforce? We don't have to just do random causality. We could say, oh, they phished someone. They went to a .top domain. And by the way, there's your, I was saying earlier, if you want to see if a company's secure, see if they could put a string on a meta tag or a DNS tax record or something like that. Another one is see if they resolve .top domains by default. If they do, or .zip, they don't have a chance. Come on, you're not even trying if you allow that stuff to resolve.
I think you may have some issues with
that. I'm willing to take on that collateral damage.
By the way, just one other data point around the data science and the survey-based approach that Marsh McLennan took. He talks about using the bit sites and the security scorecards of the world and determining whether any of those data points moves the needle as well. Those are not survey-based. They are external factors that one can observe to determine whether or not any of those factors makes a difference.
Oh, but that's even worse, though. I mean, can you talk about
not
being in the kill chain?
No, it's not that it's worse. It's just saying, and it's all correlation, yes, but these are the things that correlate strongly to or strongly against payouts.
Yeah, but I mean, if you go down that road and you end up with people who support TLS 1.0 of a higher degree of paying, that's just bad science and driving bad behavior, I feel like. And that's what BitSite's going to land on, I think. All right, cool. I didn't trigger you on that. So wrapping it up here. So this is a cool topic. So my friend, Sean Marion, a great CISO and a cool dude, he published a really interesting article. I think he did it on LinkedIn called "No, You Probably Don't Need a Technical CISO," and so I want to talk about that a little bit because I see that go on a lot. And what he's ultimately saying is that in the interview process, that the over technical questions and over indexing on whether or not you have that engineering background can be faulty, can be a bad correlation to efficacy of a chief information security officer. It's tempting to set you guys up to be the bad guy here, but I'll just come out of the gate. I don't agree with that. I think that it's like saying to run a hospital, do you have to have been a doctor? You could make some arguments, no, but why would we? Like, why do we have to have more, availability into being a CISO for people who aren't qualified? I was railing with my kids the other day. I was trying to explain to them when they're using the computer. They wanted to do some Minecraft mod or something, and I went with them, and I went to the site, and the whole time I'm just like panicking and saying like, this is crap, don't click on that. You see that thing that says download? That's an advertisement, and the advertiser mimicked the font and the CSS of the screen and pretended it's a download button, but really it's a minefield. You can never use the internet by yourself, that kind of thing. So I do think that you got to have chops, and that we shouldn't. What I finally said to the kids is I said, back in the day, the internet used to be great when it was only the smart people, and then we made it easy for the dumb people, and they all showed up. So are we running the risk of doing that to CISO dumb by saying you don't really have to understand the technology here?
There are a couple things to point out. One is, let's take a CFO. Let's actually suppose this is a CFO interview. Mm-hmm. Would you expect them to say, do you know math? Like, what do you, of course, right? I'm starting at the very lowest level, right? Like, do you know math? All right, clearly a dumb question. Do you know what generally accepted accounting practices are? Like, yeah, I'm like, what do you think my job's about, right? Of course I know that. Do you expect me, when's the last time you've done the books? Or, I'm not saying that a CFO is an accountant per se, a CPA, but these are some of the kind of skills that a CFO, different types of CFOs would have, right? And so I guess the question I would be asking is, I would hope that a CFO at least has the understanding of those different types of disciplines and how they factor into a business and how they factor into how a business runs. And also, I would have questions around, understand finance and how, the monetary system, all these different things that go into knowing how to be a good CFO. So those are all the things that, in some respects, are table stakes, right? You expect them to know these things. And so if I'm starting to be asked those questions, in some respects, I don't know, maybe for the CFO discipline as it stands today, it's pretty mature. And so when you get these kind of questions, you may almost be insulted, okay? So anyway, my point is that with a CISO role, it's still not mature. It's nowhere near as mature as a CFO role. And so if part of what the argument here is saying, look, we haven't really defined what a CISO role should be and what the level of expectation is at the CISO level, because if we compare that to a CFO, it's not even close. We have really no understanding of what the minimum requirements are for a CISO and the level of expectations that we have for them. And so we're asking these kind of questions that are, to a CFO, they would be insulted, okay? All right, anyway, my point is, I think right now, we don't really know. We haven't normalized what a CISO is. And we're gonna have to do that first.
Yeah, I think you went too soft on the CFO too. I mean, because when you set it up like, well, they at least know GAP, and you're kind of getting like they got to know what it stands for, and you got to be able to describe it in a paragraph and all that, and that's the CISSP, right? We got a lot of that going on in CISO. We don't need someone who can describe risk management and risk acceptance and all that stuff. I think we need people who can take the, hey, we want to break down change control on a code freeze going into Christmas because this is such a big deal, it needs to be patched. You can't adjudicate that and break that tie if you don't understand what pulling functions out of a library and actually using them in an application and that kind of stuff means. And it's, I'm not talking like in a way that doesn't scale. Like some people just say, well, Jerry, what you're talking about is a CISO. You can't be in the weeds that much and all. Yeah, I get it, but it comes up even in the largest enterprises. It's a massive value add to have the tiebreaker be able to tamp down their own troops and say, all right, risk managers, I'm talking to engineering and I have that background and I know that they're right and we don't have to patch this and we don't have to break the change freeze or whatever it is. And if you're just bringing in those platitudes about risk management broadly, I don't think you're really adding a lot of value at the end of the day, especially during crisis.
I'm going to applaud Sean for putting himself out there, and I honestly, genuinely appreciate that he's doing that, because I could not be in more disagreement with the dude, right? But that's, you know what I mean? But it could be my West Coast angle. Look, I don't believe I've ever been in an interview for a CISO position where I did not get grilled by some engineers on some security topic, because they wanted to understand, just to Sunil's point, at least if your company is a technically focused company that's young or mid-size, in a very competitive environment, you are going to, one way to differentiate yourself is you have cooler tech. So you better understand that technology if you're going to be a CISO for that kind of company. Maybe if you are in a manufacturing of, I don't know, heaters. Fine. I don't need to know everything there is to know about TLS 1.3, but maybe I need to do more policy. So I get his point. I get it. But for if your company's going through a transformational change, let me give you an example. If you are mostly on-prem or hybrid, but now you're starting to think about, I'm going to go now to AWS, you want to late dragons, whatever, AWS, Azure, GCP, you better understand what the challenges, the technical challenges and experience you have. So what I think when people are talking about technology, they really want to understand, one, do you have the baseline, and then you have the background? Have you experienced this? Can your experience help us make some of the, informed decisions to avoid making mistakes, big mistakes, as they move into this cloud and under these conditions, etc. I also think that when you're talking to engineers, look, I'm reading a book called Deep Work by Carl Newport. And it's really about, I don't know, Sunil, if you read this, or Jerry, but if you really think about what it says is you need to spend quality time understanding the subject, going deep. I'm overgeneralizing here. And definitely you don't want noise, you don't want Slack, you don't want your instant message, you don't want somebody knocking on the door, hey. So you got to block it off, 2, 3, 4 hours of deep thought going into the technology. I think that's an important thing that we have to do as security people, to understand newer technologies if you're in a space, in a sector where technology is a differentiator. I'm worried about AI. I'll tell you the first thing, I'm a neophyte. I'm going back to my statistics books going, okay, let's go. Let's figure this out. Right? No, seriously.
Linear algebra.
Totally.
Totally.
I love it.
Well, the reality is that we don't have enough time to go deep on all the topics, right? My point earlier was that if you're hiring Sean says this in his blog, if you're hiring a CISO, ask yourself, do you want someone who can configure a firewall, or somebody who can protect your organization's future? If you're hiring a CFO, ask yourself this, do you want somebody who knows how to balance your books, or someone who can protect your organization's future? If you're asking for a CISO, we're really asking for somebody at a slightly different level of competency in a whole different area. A lot of what you guys talked about, I might as well just hire a security engineer who can do that. Do I need to give him a CISO label? No, I don't actually. Okay, the point is that I think Sean's point is, if you're hiring a CISO, or rather, it's not about if you're hiring a CISO. We in this industry, if we want to elevate the role of the CISO to be someone who is a true business leader, who has a seat at the table, who are peers with the CFO, and so on and so forth, then we should consider that role to be somebody who would be insulted if you asked them, hey, when's the last time you configured a firewall? We're like, no, I'm sorry, that's not why you're hiring me.
I disagree. First of all, when I hire a CFO, I want them to have balanced the books 20 years ago. When I hire a chief medical officer,
Agree.
I want them to have been seeing patients 20 years ago.
Agree.
And I want my CISO to have been configuring firewalls 20 years ago. And so, yeah, they know how to configure
Or
a
writing
firewall.
code
Yeah.
that understands how CI/CD,
I think if one were to contrast the two and do an or, like an exclusive or, do you want someone who's a network engineer, or do you want someone who can speak to business and communicate? That's kind of denigrating people that have chops and saying that, they all are just pizza and Mountain Dew and they can't communicate. And the CISO is a rare spot. It's unique, and it should be that very tight Venn diagram intersection of having configured firewalls and being able to communicate. And if you're like, well, that's too hard, we can't have it all, let's just lower the bar, well, you're going to get what you asked for.
I'm not suggesting we lower the bar from the standpoint of their initial growth, their trajectory as a junior level employer, whatever their career growth was. I would expect any CISO to have that under their belt. But the question is, it goes back to the hiring process. In the hiring process, you're hiring a 20, 30-year veteran. And would you ask that question, hey, when's the last time you configured a firewall? The answer is going to be, oh, yeah, I configured one 20 years ago. Is that going to disqualify you?
No. That's the right answer.
But why even ask the question?
Yeah, well, you have a valid point, Sunil. I think the questions could be better, but I also think Sean is not saying what is the company you are interviewing for, and if technology is really important. You got a little bit more. Again, the warrior of the day for me is being nuanced, right? But here's another thing. You're right, Sunil. You can't go deep on everything, but you need to have certain things that are fundamental. You have to, at a certain level, and sometimes you have more specialization. I think all of us specialize in certain parts of security, not all of them that we can actually go deep. Now, if you want to learn more about the newer technologies, even though you're not going deep, read your red team's report. If you have really good red team people, maybe you're not the one doing the pen testing.
But you got to be able to understand it. You got to be able to understand
it. You got to understand. You got to smell this. You got to pass the smell test too. You got to know this is right, and then they're going to make recommendations, and you as a leader need to wait and say, okay, you're right. These are really important, but it's not really going to be impactful, dude. Like, it's going to take a lot of time. Can we prioritize? If I look at this, I'm thinking that particular one thing that you found, that sounds to me like it's valid and we should go after it. But you need to have those conversations. And again, to me, look at your your red team reports. Go read it. Understand it. They go deep. Some of them go deep.
Oh, yeah, you just ways to learn if you're good at it. Well, I'll tell you. So, I think I can bring it all home because I was helping someone hire a CISO, so I've been interviewing some people, right? And here's a question I asked. I mean, love it or hate it, because that's what Sunil asked. Like, should you ask when's the last time you configured a firewall? No. But what I said was, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I have it written down somewhere. It was something to the effect of, talk about how much risk is there for employees using hotel Wi-Fi, and explain what circumstances would have to be in effect for that risk to manifest. The correct answer to that is, well, someone would have had to have compromised the Wi-Fi network there already. They would have had to have the timing right to know that their target was going to be at the right time. They would have to, intercept, do a captive portal, so when the employee went to surf the internet, they would prompt something up in front of them. And then that person would have to accept a bunch of warnings like, hey, the certificate doesn't match and all of that, or put a fake page up. I want to hear all that. And yeah. And then what are the chances? I say, well, shit, it's pretty unlikely and it's going to happen unless you're a political figure and you're highly targeted and that kind of thing. And, some people will answer that. Many CISOs will say, oh, yeah, you can't use hotel Wi-Fi. And because anyone can see what you're doing on the network. And I'm not satisfied with that. What do you mean? Who can see? How do they see? Like, if you got on my Wi-Fi and I'm on my Wi-Fi, show me what I'm typing. Well, hold on. It's all tropes, and you can't run a security org with that kind of mindset, or you're dumping fiduciary value into the river every day in wasted cyber effort and burden and JIRAs and annoyances of engineers all the time. So I think chops matter. Sorry, Sean. By the way, the caveat to all this is that Sean has good chops. So I'm glad he's the one who came out and wrote this article, because otherwise it would have been pretty hard to talk back to some others. All right. I guess I get the last word on that one. Thanks a lot, guys. This was fun. I tell you, like, for the audience and as far as getting feedback, we talked last time and said, I know all of us get some unilateral feedback in a lot of different ways. I'd love to centralize some of it on LinkedIn. But one of the things I would like to hear back from people on is, sometimes we're responding to current events and news, so to speak, and other times we talk about more like strategic and philosophical approaches to security and CISOing and how to organize a team and priorities and all of that. And it will be good to get some good feedback on like which of those are more valuable, because I certainly enjoy talking about them both, but I'd love to just follow demand a bit more. All right, well, thanks, guys. I'm looking forward to catching up soon. Hope you have a good couple of weeks, and everyone let us know what you think of this going forward.